monitor in charge of the NOPD consent decree says the unit in charge of investigating police misconduct is backsliding when it comes to compliance.
A substantial part of the new report focuses on shortcomings in the Public Integrity Bureau's investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappy, a former member of Mayor Cantrell's security team. Here is our latest outside the office investigation. According to the consent decree monitor, the NOPD's Public Integrity Bureau completed its investigation on Officer Jeffrey Vappy on March 10th. 6 days later, NOPD leadership signed off on the report. But instead of Interim Superintendent Michelle Woodfork reviewing it, a deputy chief signed on her behalf and agreed with the findings. But when the consent decree monitor asked for a copy of the report, the NOPD refused to send it over, which the monitor says is required. According to the report, the NOPD took the position that the PIB investigation into Vappy was not required to be sent because it was not a serious misconduct complaint investigation. The consent decree monitor says that's wrong, since the investigation focused on alleged payroll fraud. Eventually, the NOPD relented and on April 3rd shared a copy of the report with a federal consent decree monitor.
It's disturbing to see this in writing by the police consent decree monitors.
Several key parts of the report focus on the actions by the city attorney's office. In one case, the monitor cited potential legal conflicts when the city attorney visited the Public Integrity Bureau to monitor an NOPD interview with Officer Jeffrey Vappy. The monitor wrote, situations like this can create the perception that City Hall is attempting to intimidate interviewees or investigators or otherwise interfere in a PIB investigation.
So the fact that the city attorney's office goes to just the re-interview of Officer Vappy when there had been an initial interview with Vappy, as well as all the other people that were interviewed by Public Integrity, city attorney's office was a no-show. So if this was a priority case, why wasn't the city attorney's office there for every interview? Why was there a second interview scheduled with Officer Vappy, and what was the need for the city attorney's office to be there? Keep in mind that the leak of all of the recordings wasn't by PIB, it was by the city attorney's office that had access to these. So if the city attorney's office is important in trying to build this case, why weren't they there during every interview? Why were they there only for the second interview of Officer Vappy? Who requested that? Was that PIB or was that the city attorney's influence?
The report also criticized the city attorney's office for inadvertently releasing audio recordings of the Vappy investigation, writing requesting those recordings from PIB prior to the conclusion of the investigation created a risk of an inadvertent breach as well as an appearance of impropriety. The report says PIB failed to implement the protections it promised. The monitor said because of the public and media focus on the Vappy investigation and the fact that the mayor would likely be a material witness in the investigation herself, the NOPD should have taken extra precautions to protect the integrity and avoid any appearance of impropriety. PIB agreed on the importance of confidentiality and agreed only a small circle within PIB would have access to investigation materials. The report mentions our stories on Vappy that showed potential payroll fraud, and Vappy and the mayor spending hours of the workday together inside the city-owned Upper Pentaba apartment. The monitor says the stories raised a number of questions regarding the operation of the executive protection team and actions of Vappy. The monitor questioned the efficiency of the executive protection team, pointing out members were being paid to work while the mayor was out of town. Writing at a time when NOPD has vocally complained about its lack of officers, it is quite inefficient to have multiple days when 1 to 2 additional officers are available to perform patrol work, but they are not performing patrol work. Much of the 44-page report focused on the Vappy investigation, part of the larger concerns about the NOPD's Public Integrity Bureau, the unit that investigates police misconduct. The report says the Public Integrity Bureau is not yet in compliance with the requirements of the consent decree. In some areas has never been in compliance, and in others has experienced material backsliding.
The last audit that was conducted in 2019, compared with the most recent audit, showed that the police department had fallen out of compliance with 16 paragraphs. That's backsliding. And the mayor is complaining that the consent decree is going on and taking too long. But when PIB, the Public Integrity Division, is not complying with the consent decree, and the VAPI case is a specific example of noncompliance with the consent decree. So not only does it raise questions about the integrity of the investigation, but also explains the problems with the federal judge with respect to the consent decree, because protocols weren't followed in the VAPI case.
While the monitoring team took issue with multiple aspects of the VAPI investigation, it said overall the PIB investigators did a good job. However, the monitor added the PIB failed to thoughtfully examine circumstantial evidence and failed to make a credibility determination regarding the multiple hours VAPI spent in the Upper Pentaba apartment. The consent decree monitor says those issues will be discussed in a future report.